Whoops. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming to the 2021 n+1 Writers Awards ceremony. We're so excited you could join. I'm closing some windows. It's so exciting to see everyone and listen to Pavement together. For those of you who would like to follow along, you can download a PDF, which is going to appear in the chat. My name is Elif Batuman. I am a novelist and a staff writer for The New Yorker, and I have a new novel coming out next year called Either Or, and this is my first time plugging it ever, so this feels great. I'm hugely honored to be your MC/host/guide for the evening. I will kick things off with some housekeeping, my favorite of all activities. We do have closed captioning. You guys are sweet. We do have closed captioning activated for this event. To turn it on, which I recommend just for yucks because you'll see some funny transcriptions, click on the live transcript at the bottom of the Zoom screen. You will already have noticed probably that the chat is turned on. So because we could not have a real party this evening, we decided that the chat was the closest equivalent to the quieter part of the room where you can actually hear people talk, or maybe, and I quote, the quieter, better area outside where everyone is smoking. But I want to clarify that I do not endorse smoking. However, you can be doing whatever you want now, like you could be shooting up and we wouldn't know, unless you tell us in the chat, which you should please do, as long as you're very respectful. Don't want anyone exposing themselves during the n+1 Writers Awards ceremony in a metaphoric, or if you figure out a non-metaphoric way to do it, we don't want that either. And our honorees this evening can't hear your applause, of which they are so richly deserving. So we encourage you to send virtual applause their way. Okay, I was asked to be here today by my dear friends at n+1, who were my first publishers. That's where I got my start as a writer. They published the first thing I wrote in 2005, which was a really long essay about about an Isaac Bobbitt conference at Stanford, which made it even, less publishable. Since then, I've written for n+1 about the American short story, about literary criticism, and about months of my life that I spent in Samarkand for some reason. Great, it's a wonderful place. For those of you unfamiliar with the magazine, I don't know who you are or why you exist, but welcome. You're very welcome here. n+1 publishes fiction, criticism, essays, and political writing of all kinds 3 times a year. There have been 39 issues of the magazine since it was launched in 2004, and I am informed by n+1's sophisticated data analytics operation that works out to 286 individual contributors, many of whom, like me, got their first professional byline with the magazine. n+1 also publishes books, as does its sister publication, Paper Monument. And there's a great website, n+1 mag. I looked up for 1 second and I forgot the URL, n+1mag.com, where you can read new writing much more frequently than 3 times a year, as we all encourage you to do for your health and for other reasons too. There are events throughout the year, these days all digital, but hopefully some in real life too. We're here this evening to celebrate the recipients of 2 awards, as well as 1 very important and deeply missed contributor. For the past 6 years, n+1 has given out a prize called the Writers' Fellowship, which honors contributors whose work has been especially crucial in shaping the magazine's direction. Usually that award is handed out at an in-person fundraiser, but that is impossible now. So here we are. This year, n+1 also created a second award the Anthony Veasna So Fiction Prize. We're going to hear more about Anthony and the prize later this evening. But for now, I would just like to thank our sponsors who are going to appear in the chat now. They will be invoked in the chat now, they won't actually appear. One last note, if you'd like to support n+1 as you clearly would if you have a human heart beating in your chest, the best way to do that is to subscribe to the magazine. Visit n+1mag.com/subscribe to do so. If you're already a subscriber and you'd like to support n+1 and great new writing further, visit n+1mag.com/donate. Any donation made with your ticket tonight goes to support the Fellowship and Fiction Prize this year and in the future. Now I am delighted to introduce the national and indeed international treasure, Dana Tortorici. Dana joined n+1 in 2010 and has been co-editor-in-chief since 2014. Her writing has also appeared in the New York Times Book Review, The Guardian, The Atlantic, Harper's Magazine, and elsewhere. Hello, Dana.
Hi, Elif. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for being here. It's really, really difficult to not just stare at the chat because it's incredibly heartwarming that you're here tonight. We really miss doing in-person events, but as Elif said, this is what we've got. So I'm going to, as Elif already began to, talk about the n+1 Writers Fellowship and a little bit about the backstory of how it came to be. So in 2015, n+1 decided to create this fellowship to honor the kind of print contributor that had come to make the magazine unique. The writer we had in mind that we wanted to honor was someone whose work captured the spirit of n+1, which to us meant someone who approached the problems of contemporary life and politics with lucidity and intelligence and humor, someone with an original voice whose thinking took unusual or surprising paths to understanding, and someone who was attentive to language and to the music and rhythms of their sentences without being overly precious or brittle about it. So we created the n+1 Writers Fellowship, which is a $5,000 award with no strings attached. The idea being that we wanted the recipient to pursue their writing wherever it took them, whether that was in our pages or elsewhere. Past recipients of the fellowship include Kristen Dombeck, A.S. Hamra, Elizabeth Shamblin, Bella Shayevich, and Philip Connors. This year, it's my great pleasure to grant the award to Christina Nichol, whose essays for n+1 have the distinction of being the sort of thing you can't find anywhere else. I was first introduced to Christina's writing through her essay, An Account of My Hut, in n+1. It's about looking for a house in California in 2017 amid the state's ongoing housing crisis and during what were then the worst fires to rip through the state. It's also about grieving the planet. At the beginning of the essay, Christina joins a climate change action group that she reads about in the local newspaper, where she learns how to talk to people about climate change and how not to. The group is touchingly Californian and somewhat ineffectual. Even during the fires and during Hurricanes Irma and Harvey, nobody wants to connect the disasters they're living through to the impending climate apocalypse. What's so striking to me about this essay is that it's really funny, much funnier than any essay about a devastating fire or climate change has any right to be. Here's an excerpt from that essay. Quote, "We learned that 61% of Americans say climate change is important to them, but they rarely or never discuss it with people they know. Our homework," and this is in the group, "was to become climate change evangelists for a month. To prepare, we discussed how to raise the topic with a stranger. Sure is hot these days, or how often do you take the train, or trying to save on fossil fuels, or do you ever remember it being 97 degrees in October? I decided as an experiment in humiliation to discuss climate change everywhere I went. The following are methods I do not recommend. 1, bumping into someone's shopping cart at Safeway. Oh, sorry, I was just so distracted thinking about climate change. 2, after complaining to my boss about the measly salary I make as an adjunct professor. I apologize for expressing myself in such a heated manner about how impossible it is to live on this salary. I was just really distressed thinking about climate disruption. This is skipping one. 4, I went to my friend's Blade Runner party, which was filled with 40-something guys who kept reciting all the lines and knew all the trivia answers. During the pee break, one guy started talking about how we'd all be wearing Google Glass in 10 years. If the earth doesn't burn up, I said. Right, someone interjected. I thought we might be on our way to a useful discussion. This party just turned into a real downer, someone else said, so we went back to the movie, unquote. It's a buoyant account of a very heavy thing. I'll also never forget Christina's description in that essay of the pieces of half-burnt paper that littered the air during the fires. It's almost too on the nose a symbol of the futility of writing about climate change that I think it's perhaps best presented without comment. It goes like this, quote, during the fires, I took walks. I tried to read the paper falling from the sky. I wanted to collect scattered notes, but they disintegrated when I picked them up, leaving the smell of poison on the tips of my fingers. The paper pieces lay curled like chocolate shavings. They were all the size of my palm. I was looking for stories, but I could only find information. Bible pages, sections from Genesis, cell phone bills, pieces of romance novels, so many of those. Perfectly preserved letters, so meticulously burned around the edges, they looked the way letters do when you burn them in 4th grade to make them look romantic. Gold embossed stationery with someone's name written over and over in tiny letters at a 45-degree angle. Musical scores, Swedish vacation package tour brochures, pieces of phone books, people still have phone books, a kid's homework, he did poorly, journal pages, so many pages of people talking to themselves, as well as tar paper and bits of insulation burned thin as paper. I walked and tried not to breathe, unquote. Elsewhere in the essay, Christina describes how in the environmental studies class that she teaches, she and her students are trying to read the minds of plants. Her boyfriend tells her, quote, the only way you'll be able to read the mind of a plant is if you slow your metabolism way down. Humans can't slow their metabolism to the rhythm of a plant. Plant thoughts are too slow for humans to understand. Christina continues, but I'd been practicing the long, slow view. Nature's metabolism works much more sluggishly than ours. The cumulative effect of CO2 are slow but steady like a tortoise or a bionic woman in slow motion. I tried to listen. I took a rock and used it as a clock. I started thinking in geologic time, unquote. All of Christina's writing is characterized, to me at least, by this struggle, the desire to see the long, slow, interconnected vegetable or mineral view while remaining a human animal. Her voice is a mix of sincerity and humor, wonderment and bewilderment, and has a very disarming effect on the page. It's a voice I find very relatable and very Christina. As often happens with good writers, the best description of her own project comes to us in her own words. In her most recent piece for n+1 about spending time with her eccentric extended family before the pandemic, called The Earth, Dreams, and Ritual, she writes the following, quote, on holidays, my uncle liked to play something called liminal space, making frequent reference to the anthropologist Victor Turner in his book, The Ritual Process. Liminal space was transformational space, a threshold, a gateway, part of a rite of passage to cast off the mundane world and grow into something more creative and dynamic. Liminal space was anti-structure, carnivalesque, and afternoon's access to a more luminous world than the narrow vision of the secular, modern, isolated, status-oriented individual. She says, that's my wording. The way my uncle interpreted Turner's concept of liminal space was that everything significant in life takes place on a holiday, a holy day, where real life abides, unquote. And that's what Christina's writing actually feels like to me. Anti-structure, carnivalesque, and afternoon's access to a more luminous world, a kind of holiday. And with that, it's my pleasure to award the n+1 Writers Fellowship to Christina Nichol.
Thank you so much, Dana. I am so grateful, and I was also so astonished to get this award. Partly because just the night before that I heard that I got it, I had been telling this writers group that I'm in that that I'd been reading about how creative writing programs many of them had originally been started because they wanted to to develop the ideology of individualism in order to combat communism. And so I was telling them that I felt really liberated because it meant that sort of all writing is propaganda. And I'd been studying, you know, this, I mean, I've had this obsession between the individualist sort of story structure and collectivist story structure. And so I realized, well, if all writing, especially in the US, is this sort of individualist propaganda, then I can just write carnivalesque eco communitas propaganda. And that you know, but that's obviously not going to be celebrated in this culture. But then the very next day, I get this notice that I got this award. So I was really shocked, and so I called my friend Bongjun, whose character has played a lot of a pretty big part in these essays that I've written, and I told him, and I said, you know, we actually, so there's the person Bongjun and there's the character Bongjun, and we sort of have joint custody over the character Bongjun. He's kind of like our son. And so I said, you know, I got this award, and you know, we should celebrate because our son Bongjun is part of this. And I said, but I'm really surprised that I got this, because, you know, all those n+1 people, they're like geniuses from the East Coast, and I'm from California and not really a genius. And he said, oh no, it's not surprising that you got this. And I said, how's that? And he said, well, you know, n+1 means anti-authoritarianism. And you know, he's a physicist, so I thought, well, maybe he knows his equations. I just never heard the anti-authoritarianism equation. But he's like, oh yeah, n+1 anti-authoritarianism. And I said, well, how's that? And he said, well, you know, in Korea, he's Korean. He said, when we go out to eat at a restaurant, we divide the check by n. So that's the number of people who are going out to eat. And so n means mass. N means a collection of people. But a collection of people is always in danger of becoming totalitarian. And so we need that one individual to remind us of the importance of the individual. So that's why we need each other. And that's why Korea and America need each other, so he was so thrilled about Biden and Moon Jae-in having such a successful summit. So I started thinking about this n+1, and how actually for me, the one, that +1 actually represents the stranger, and how the stranger, you know, allows us to see in a new way. And Tolstoy was purported to have said that there are two types of stories, that the person goes on a journey, or a stranger comes to town. And there's also, I mean, that's actually the same story, but from two different perspectives. And I just wanted to read a little piece by the Moroccan writer Fatima Mernissi in her book Scheherazade Goes West, because she says this about the stranger. She says, if by chance you were to meet me at the Casablanca airport, or on a boat sailing from Tangiers, you would think me self-confident, but I'm not. Even now, at my age, I am frightened when crossing borders, because I'm afraid of failing to understand strangers. So she speaks of how Fez, the city she grew up in, these trained Sufi masters would get these flashes of insight that increased exponentially simply because they would try to understand the strangers that pass through their lives. So the collective and the individualist worldviews represent these sort of two types of seeing, the interdependent and the independent. And right now, I think it's so important that we learn how to become ambidependent. And in this flattening world right now, where my brain feels so colonized so often by these sound bites and people trying to prove their affiliations, I'm so grateful that n+1 has provided me this place to write about that strangeness that hasn't yet gone extinct, and those emancipatory sparks that still alight during the colliding of worldviews.
Christina, awesome. Thank you so much. People in the chat are requesting that we publish your remarks because they want to read them. But yes, virtual applause for Christina. Forever fan. I wanted to ask you just a couple questions, sort of on the themes that you already mentioned in your remarks. Apropos of the independent and the interdependent. Your writing frequently points to a desire for community and collectivity, but writing itself is a solitary affair in most cases. So how does community tend to show up in your writing process or in the way that you structure your essays?
Well, it's only been recently that storytelling was an independent process or lonely process. I mean, most storytelling is primarily gossip. And so I think in some sense, I'm trying to bring that sense of oral storytelling to the page. I think that's why it tends to be very dialogue heavy. But so, and it's true, I've had this sort of koan of, how does one tell a story of the collective? I mean, because our Western style stories, you have this protagonist and they have a goal and they overcome these obstacles and they have some fatal flaw they overcome, but eventually they have a self-realization and the audience or the reader has some sort of cathartic experience. But in for example, Chinese theories of fiction, what makes a good novel is actually directly opposite of that, in that, there's the emphasis is on telling rather than showing, and on these kind of authorial interruptions, or on street gossip, or on like there's not really an emphasis on interiority, and there's not that sense of striving and that a person has any agency over their destiny, that it's actually that wars or political systems or an earthquake or a fire actually has a bigger impact on someone's destiny. And so the goal is not a catharsis necessarily, but actually to get the reader to feel not alone. And so sort of my koan has been, how do you do that in a Western style story where people are accustomed to these certain conventions? And so I've been thinking a lot about sort of that it has to do with, high context, low context cultures. And so a culture like the US is, a low context culture in that we don't really share a lot of commonalities. So when we're describing something, we go into this great detail. So for example, if you're describing a refrigerator, you might go into, a great deal about this specific particular refrigerator. Whereas in a more collectivist culture, pretty much everyone has the same refrigerator. So they're going to get the joke. And so there's this sort of inside joke quality. So how do I create that inside joke quality by kind of kind of just planting the seeds and circling back, and to kind of get that sense so that the reader feels that sense of intimacy, that they've got the joke. And I mean, sometimes it works. I think a lot of times it doesn't, and then you guys cut out the jokes that don't work.
The ones that work really work, though. They're good. This is sort of related to my second question, which is, about different cultures and different national cultures and different cultures across time. You've lived in a lot of places. If people caught your bio in the slideshow, there's a sort of list of different places that you've lived or taught English, and was wondering if you could tell the audience a little bit about the places that you've lived and how traveling and living in different countries and different places has affected your point of view and your philosophy as a writer.
Well, I think it's just, I just, having lived in all these places, I just sort of live in this perpetual state of chronic culture shock in this kind of in-between world. And so I think I do walk around in this sort of perpetual bewilderment. I think I had just gotten back from India when the pandemic hit, and I think all of a sudden everyone was walking around in a state of bewilderment, and so it made things a little bit easier to deal with that kind of culture shock. But I think the main thing is visiting these different places and realizing just all of the different options, all the different possibilities of being a human, and and not being bound by what we say a human in America is, and that there are these sort of other fulfilling, meaningful ways than just what's available on the American menu. But I think the culture that, or the country that sort of impacted me the most, that I still haven't really recovered from, was living in the Republic of Georgia, in that, they were recovering from, they're transitioning from the Soviet times, and so they were reinventing their self-identity, but they didn't really want to go the way of American style or Western style capitalism. They actually preferred the 12th century and the chivalry of the 12th century, and this sort of poetic, romantic ideas and so at that time the men had what they called this Robin Hood complex, where they would hold up trains and steal from the men to give to the women. And I was just so, it was just so weird, and yet I was so fascinated that a country could decide to go for the more artistic, romantic values than our sort of practical monetary values. And so I think at that point I sort of fell in love with absurdism, and I haven't really been able to recover. And so I think Georgia became my sort of gravitational center, and all of a sudden the US became that absurd place. And I mean, yet I think that absurd lens is also a kind of a love lens. So, I mean, I think that the main thing is that these cultures, it sort of allowed me to access a part of myself that I can't seem to access in the US. And I think essentially, I just write in order to try to create an atmosphere to access those parts of myself again, with the hope that maybe that atmosphere can help other people access those parts of themselves.
I think it works. Christina, thank you so much for writing for us, for your remarks. Let's get another round of applause for Christina in the chat, the lively chat, and then I'll hand it back to you, Elif.
Thank you, Data.
Congratulations, Christina, and thank you for that incredible address. There were multiple calls in the comments for this to become a regular seminar that we can all go to all the time, and I would love that. I really loved the last point, but anyway, that was amazing. I can't wait. The evening's second award, which Mark Krotov will present in a moment, is the Anthony Veasna Fiction Prize, named in honor of the beloved n+1 contributor who died late last year at the absurdly young age of 28. His story collection, After Parties, will be published in August by Echo. I had the great good fortune of meeting Anthony briefly in 2019 at Syracuse, where I was talking with the MFA students, courtesy of loyal friend of n+1, Mary Carr. And Anthony was one of the students I met with. I read an excerpt of I think it was a novel he was working on, and talking about it with him. And it was almost like a weird delight. And all the students were fantastic, but I mean, I'm not making this up. I definitely came back and I couldn't stop telling my girlfriend about all the incredibly delightful students. And I was like, no, there's this queer Khmer American writer who's writing these hilarious, life-affirming novel about cousins in Oakland. And I mean, anyone who met Anthony even briefly will feel this as a huge loss. My heart really goes out to his family and loved ones. And it's such a gift that we have his book, After Parties, and it's another gift that we have this prize that n+1 is giving, which is really wonderful. Before I turn it over to Mark to present the prize, we'd like to share a few remembrances of Anthony from readers, writers, and editors who knew him.
In May 2018, n+1 introduced me to Anthony Veasna. Mark Krotov told me I would love this story, Super King's Son Scores Again, and he was absolutely right. After I read that story, I read everything I could find online that Anthony had written, and then I brandished this copy of n+1 around the Grove Atlantic offices, so excited to share this new voice with my colleagues.
I was fortunate to meet Anthony last winter at Tin House. Even beyond his own talent, he was such a funny, warm, vivacious presence. He read his peers generously, as invested in their growth as in his own. I was thrilled to revisit his writing when he sent me his debut story collection last fall. His stories are surprising, complex, hilarious, and challenging. He tackles difficult topics irreverently, never lapsing into cynicism.
Anthony was hyper aware of his position as a queer Cambodian writer, and he thought constantly about how to write histories of genocide, trauma, and immigration. His first book was in some ways a formal argument for all of his preoccupying thoughts on race and queerness and history.
Here are a few things that are stereotypically Asian American: Costco, badminton, the McDonald's dollar menu, monks, Jack in the Box tacos, Church's chicken, minivans, 24/7 donut shops, fast food chains in general, inherited trauma, burpees, getting stoned, dropping out of med school to pursue literary criticism. Anthony's stories draw on all these tropes and more, but his writing doesn't rehearse hackneyed themes or over-sentimentalized similes. Instead, his stories make me laugh, often out loud.
When he was dunking on his contemporaries or those half a generation above him, and he had this exhilaration and a sort of jaded over-itness that both played out against each other at the same time in really fascinating ways. He could be very heartfelt and just incredibly cutting and ironic too.
I never met Anthony in real life, but when I read all this in Super King's Son Scores Again, published in issue 31, I thought, I swear I know this person. So I sent over an oddball art suggestion to accompany the story, a Yelp photo of the market by the house where I grew up. I had a hunch it was the same one. Anthony wrote back, "That is the exact Super King grocery store I'm writing about. Last week, I visited California and was literally in that store waiting for the butcher to gut some fish for my mom. But because that's a photo of the literal store, we can't use it. Even though the story is very fictional, I'm pretty sure my parents would be pissed if I called that much attention to the store / their friends." Unquote. This too I understood, Anthony. I know your ancestors mourn you because they raised a son who loved them and sought to shield them from harm.
One of my favorite rhetorical strategies of his was the frequent invocation of the plural first person. As with Anthony's use of comedy, his turn to the collective we feels generous without generalizing. It's a form of stereotyping that feels remarkably honest for its knowing levity, and its refusal to exceptionalize or fetishize what is often just felt like living.
Over the past couple of years, I had the chance to meet up with Anthony several times when he visited New York. I miss him terribly, and I'm devastated that he's gone. I miss his laugh, his dry sense of humor, his intense view of the world. He was incredibly talented and just getting started.
To depict a place, our shared hometown, so vividly that a stranger could guess its precise location from the descriptions of its smell, and to feel protective of those smells, and also maybe protective of the humiliations from which we could not shield the adults we loved when we were still kids in that town. To write as you did, a miracle.
I loved following his voice into all the worlds that he created. And I'm sending all of my love to his family, friends, and readers in the wake of this unimaginable loss.
Hi, my name is Mark Krotov, and I'm the publisher and co-editor of n+1. I'm just going to turn my chat off so that I'm not distracted. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, and thank you to Britt Bennett, Jane Hu, Mark Doughton, Peter Blackstock, and Sue Wu for those incredible remembrances, and for the subtle and beautiful readings of Anthony's life and work. Before I introduce Trevor Shikaze, the winner of the inaugural Anthony Veasna So Fiction Prize, I want to take a moment to introduce the prize itself, which inevitably involves talking a little more about Anthony. The first time I met Anthony, before I'd ever read a word of his writing, I was immediately struck by how quickly his mind worked, how his thoughts and observations seemed to emerge all at once in an onrush, while also always feeling perfectly in place and in sequence. At times, listening to Anthony was like listening to a one-man group chat. And in fact, the more time that we spent together, the more time he actually spent narrating the dramas, controversies, and jokes transpiring in his own group chat. And group chats. These were my favorite moments in our conversations, partly because that expansive plural first person suited him so well. He was everyone in the chat, presenting every side of every argument. As Christina said, most storytelling is primarily gossip, and gossip was something Anthony was very, very good at trading in. As Jane said in her remarks, that plural first person, of course, appeared in Anthony's writing too. The first story of his I read, and the first story n+1 ended up publishing, is narrated by a we that's generous without generalizing, as Jane put so well. Like all his work, that story, Super King Sun Scores Again, is extraordinarily precise. So precise that based on a few sentences worth of smells and descriptions, Sue was able to discern that Anthony could only be talking about one particular grocery store in their shared hometown. But in Anthony's plural first person, there's also an inclusivity, a passionate desire to bring the reader in, to show them how it feels, or I suppose, how it felt to live in his world, in his worlds. Everyone who ever met Anthony or emailed with him or simply read his stories and essays was smitten with him, everyone at n+1, excuse me. And when he died, we all felt that we had to honor him in a way that felt substantial and enduring. Hence the Anthony Veasna So Fiction Prize, a $5,000 award given out to a writer who has published fiction in the magazine or on our website, or both. For years before his work appeared in n+1, Anthony was a devoted reader of the magazine, and as far as tributes go, rewarding writers he himself loved or would have loved felt right. What kind of writing does the prize celebrate? there are no firm constraints, no prejudices or favoritism on the basis of genre or length or style or voice or theme or content. But that combination of precision and universality embodied by Anthony's work is pretty good shorthand. Fiction that's attuned to its surroundings and its moment. Fiction that aims to connect to the reader, however indirectly or unusually. Fiction that opts for humor even in the midst of tragedy and grief and chaos. Fiction that, for all its possible excesses and flourishes and strangenesses, leaves us with a clearer understanding of the world we inhabit. Anthony's writing did all this, and so does Trevor Shikaze's. Trevor is a satirist for an era that by all rights should be beyond satire. Philip Roth, sorry, but it's true, famously wrote that it is very hard, if not impossible, for writers, quote, to understand, describe, and then make credible much of American reality. It stupefies, it sickens, it infuriates, and finally, it is even a kind of embarrassment to one's meager imagination. What is so funny to me about this line is that Roth wrote it in 1963. The first thing that struck me about Trevor's story, Beast Leave, which we published in 2018, was the way Trevor didn't seem put out by how much more stupefying, sickening, and infuriating things had become. We were living in Donald Trump's America, in Elon Musk's America, and ExxonMobil's America, and Steve Bannon's America. But for all that, Beast Leave had a sprightly vibe and an even keel. In the ever so exaggerated society Trevor describes, huge numbers of citizens have become so superfluous that the government encourages them to assemble animal-robot hybrids they then have to destroy, on the assumption that life offers no other thrills. There are a number of different beasts to choose from, and this is how Trevor's narrator weighs the options. I'm gonna kind of skip around a little bit. The first decision I have to make is bits or brawn, as they say. For me, that one's a no-brainer. I decide right away I don't want to go digital. I guess you could say I'm a traditional sort of guy in that respect. Plus, once I'd made up my mind to build, Parm gave me a copy of this book, Shop Class's Soulcraft, and it really got me thinking. I don't want to just download a life. I want to build my man from the guts out, really get my hands bloody. Once I decide to go with flesh, the first thing I have to do is settle on what kind of heart to use. The heart is the most important part to me. It's symbolic, so I want to get it right. Another option is hearts from dead children, which seemed 100% wrong to me at first, but then the more I thought about it and read up on it, the more it really started to make sense. These kids die from natural causes, and there's a whole system in place to make sure the vendors are the actual parents, not just some random child killer. So I feel like the checks and balances are there. And I was reading this HuffPo article, and the guy's point was like, it's actually racist to think that Chinese parents would kill their own children just to sell their hearts to rich Westerners. And I was like, yeah, it is. So I feel pretty comfortable about my decision. What does one call writing like this? Is it slacker dystopia? Is it stoner cli-fi? I'm gonna just kind of go off script and read just a tiny bit more from Trevor's second n+1 story, Parasite Air, which opens like this. A billionaire pays me to offset his carbon. He jets around the world while I do very little. Breach of contract includes watching TV, looking at the internet, driving a car, using a phone. So mostly I just sit at home and read, which is fine. That's what I used to do anyway before our partnership began, back when I was what statisticians would call a discouraged worker. Now I am encouraged. We have a good library system in town. I walk to the nearest branch, check out a stack of books, come home to my apartment and read. I eat raw food. My personal footprint is minimal. Rereading Beast Leave and Parasite Air this week, I kept thinking about how many pitfalls Trevor's work avoids. His stories are haunting but never portentous. They're vicious but never smarmy, hilarious but never glib, visionary but never defeated. At the end of Parasite Air, something very strange happens involving transfiguration and also a large bird, and the effect is of a leap or an elevation into the unknown. Trevor writes satire that transcends satire. To read him is to encounter a writer who, like Anthony, is ever in pursuit of new worlds and new degrees of understanding. I'm so honored to present the inaugural Anthony Veasna So Fiction Prize to Trevor Shikaze. Hi, Trevor.
Hi, thank you, Mark. Can you see me? Yeah. Thank you for that very kind and generous introduction. I wanted to start off talking about influence and inspiration. Anthony Veasna's fiction is inspiring to me. His characters, the window he gives onto an experience, his observations and insights, his humor. But this award is a huge boost for me. And so what I wanted to say is I fully intend to use that boost. And with a little luck and a lot of hard work, I hope to transform that boost into a book. I never knew Anthony. And so what I wanted to say is that you may never know where your influence will land or who it will boost. And I think that is a great inducement to continue to work. And I wanted to say that in case there's anyone here who's struggling. Maybe you question why you do what you do, whatever it is that you do. Maybe you feel you aren't seeing any tangible results. The thing is, influence is invisible, and we're all connected. So there will be results. And that's what I've been thinking of since I learned of this award. When I learned of this award, I have to say, I was surprised. I mean, I was as surprised as I would be to find out one day out of the blue that I won a Nobel Prize in mathematics, which would be surprising to me because A, I'm basically a numerate, and B, there is no Nobel Prize in mathematics. It's a common misconception. I was going to do that as a joke. I was going to say, which would have been surprising to me, because one, I'm basically a numerate. 3, there is no Nobel Prize in mathematics. It's a common misconception, but I didn't do the joke because I worried that people might not catch it, or they might not get it and they wouldn't laugh, or that they would catch it and they would get it, but they still wouldn't laugh because they wouldn't think it was very funny or very original. And then I worried the Society for the Rights of the Enumerate would target me for making light of what is, after all, a very serious disability, and they would denounce me on social media, and then other writers for something to do would pile on, and n+1 would be forced to repudiate all my writing and rescind the award, and everything would fall apart. But then I thought, I am basically a numerate. So I'm allowed to make that joke. So you see, I second guess myself, and then I second guesses, and so I live in an infinite regress of doubt. When my first story was published in n+1, I thought it must be a fluke. My second story was published in n+1, I thought it must be a lapse in judgment. But when I read the writers I've been published alongside, I'm forced to concede the editors of n+1 a very, very good judgment. And so I thought my agent must have slipped someone a bribe. I think she's here, Sylvie. Hi, Sylvie. Sylvie Carr, the car agency. You see, I would rather think the worst of people than imagine that my writing has value. Then yet here we are. So maybe this is an opportunity for me to take a leap of faith. I tell you this, to give you some sense of what this award means to me, of what is at stake for me, and of the depth of my gratitude to the n+1 Foundation for this honor. I want to thank the magazine and everybody who works at the magazine for making room for me in your pages. And in particular, I want to thank Mark Rotov for welcoming and encouraging my writing and working with me through the editorial process. I look forward to future reading. I look forward to future writing. There will be results. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Trevor. That was the joke. You didn't know because you weren't looking at the chat, but the joke really landed.
I did it? Good.
So, and now you're never going to believe me,
No.
but I'm telling you the truth.
It's fine. You can just lie to me in front of all these people, and I'll take it. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's no. I would never. Well, there's actually, it's funny because we've talked a fair amount sort of, but I think we're always like pretty good at staying on task. And so we usually kind of talk editorially, but there's all these questions have built up over my years of reading you and working with you, but we only have time for a couple. But I was thinking as I was rereading your work in the lead up to this event that in fact part of what drew me to n+1 back in the ancient historical days, when I first became a reader, which was around 2006 or so, was that in n+1 there seemed to really be very kind of no boundary between literature and politics and no siloing of these things. And I was just very, I don't know if it was like the punk rock or whatever else, but I was very drawn to this, and it felt very important, especially because I think the prevailing discourse around fiction was in fact, quite like was in fact to wall these things off. And I think that's changed a little bit, but I was curious whether when you were starting out writing and when you were kind of making decisions about sort of what shape your own work would take, whether that was also a kind of pressure that you were feeling and a sort of a tendency that you were trying to react against in some way.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I don't know. I think that probably not. It wasn't thought out. I think it's kind of just what I got to do reflexively because it's what's on my mind, right? We're living in this crazy world, and I'm metabolizing it and putting it out there. Yeah, and it's not like it's not like an aesthetic decision or an ideological decision or anything. It's truly just what comes out. But yeah, no, it's interesting. And I think that probably increasingly, how can you ignore, right? Or silo off what we're living in? It seems impossible to me. Or at least that there has to be chaos in the background. Like to my mind, even if we're writing a love story today, it's kind of a love story set against the climate catastrophe kind of thing. Or if it's not, I don't know. Well, I guess I should. People can write whatever they want. That's how I feel, though. I really cannot avoid what is around me and what is kind of horrifying me daily.
Sure, though, obviously, like a crucial part of that metabolism is that it does emerge as this like incredibly funny stuff. I think that the tenor of the times is like, sometimes it's quite, is very, very darkly funny, but often it's just in fact so kind of like viscerally bleak that that certainly turning to satire and turning to gags, which obviously I say is like a total compliment, is a choice. And I'm kind of curious, can you sort of trace that sort of satirical impulse in a way?
Yeah, again, I feel like it's just a matter of character, like who I am. I think that's how I react. It's probably some element of, self-soothing, whatever, that there are different ways you can react to living in a dystopia. And I think for me, laughter, but also, it's not just kind of like a laughter to comfort oneself. It is also, we are living in an absurd reality. And in a way, I think the best way to highlight, especially the kinds of things that I want to take aim at, which is kind of like mendacious politicians and I don't know, these Silicon Valley freaks who want to send us to Mars, I guess, to die there, I guess, in the airless, hellscape. I think that, I don't know, people take them seriously. And it's like, maybe Trump disrupts all of this because it's like, yeah, but up until then, people took the kind of titans of industry and politicians seriously. I think that, this is the value, right, of satire, is to kind of make fun of what is horrifying. Again, it's a reflex. I don't know, maybe it's a thing about punching up too, where you kind of have to feel like, all I can really do is make fun of this because, I don't have a ton of power. but there's power too, I think, in skewering what you can.
Oh, I think that, yeah, I think there's a lot. I think there's a tremendous amount. One thing, because both of these stories sort of came out in, in the Trump years, but Beast Leave a couple of years before Parasite Air. And of course it's a very limited sample size of 2, but I was curious whether you kind of felt in your own writing, whether you felt the writing change at all over the course of the Trump years. Like, was it harder to, I don't know, was it harder to be funny? And part of why I asked that is because in rereading both of the stories this week, I found Parasite Air to be, despite having like lots of sort of wonderful silliness in common and a sort of like a pleasant similarity in voice, I found it to be a lot more subdued, a lot more sort of mystical, and kind of and even maybe liberated in a sort of paradoxical way. And I was wondering whether that was something you were feeling as you were writing, and also sort of related kind of part B would be how you feel, what kind of relationship you have to this mode now, whether it still feels comfortable to you, whether you feel like you are trying to sort of find new vocabularies or new modes.
I think, yeah, I think there has been a change. It's funny, I wrote Beast Leave before Trump appeared, but it very much, I'm not a gamer. I don't play video games, but I follow technology pretty closely. I actually wrote Beast Leave during the Gamergate thing, when I kind of became aware of, I mean, I guess I'd kind of been aware of it a little bit, but there's this kind of like growing ugly Reddit kind of underground. And when it blew up in these kinds of attacks that were very much part of this like weird, like the manosphere, like the underbelly. I mean, the manosphere is like an underbelly. It was like the underbelly of the underbelly. I don't know. I very much felt like it that I was touching on. I don't think it is super apparent in the story, but I felt it. Some kind of vein of ugliness that was kind of bursting. Yeah, and I don't know. Yeah, once we get into the Trump era, it's like, how do you make fun of this stuff? It's making fun of itself. You talk about turning to kind of a more mystical direction. There might be something to that. I mean, it's like, how do we cope? I think is maybe something that I'm kind of looking at more. Totally sweating because I'm under a sweat lamp here in my closet. Yeah, I think my focus has changed a lot. And it's interesting to react to an absurd reality. I think that maybe I am kind of dialing back the absurdity a little bit, or just letting it play in the background a little bit more. Yeah, that's all I can say.
Well, obviously that only makes me more excited about, the next Trevor Shikaze story n+1 publishes. Maybe it's just gonna sound like, I don't know, like John Cage or something. Just gonna be
like nothing. Yeah.
Totally quiet. Well, one thing, I was just curious about, and forgive me for such a at once obvious but invasive question, but I am very curious. Do you yourself find that you read a lot of satire and satirists, or are your reading habits actually quite sort of unaligned with the kind of stuff that you're writing?
Yeah, more unaligned. I mean, honestly, it is. I think that I think it's just how, what I've said earlier, that I process things in a certain way. So I don't really read necessarily the sort of stuff that I write. I think I write because of my limitations. And I, if I could write the sort of luminous prose that I so admire, I would do that. But gotta rely on gags a bit more, gotta rely on the gimmicks. But that's also, I mean, I don't know, I guess that is how I am. So that's what comes out. Yeah.
Well, I think all of your readers are very, very happy that you're exactly the way you are. So please, yeah, don't stop relying on the gags, especially when they come to you. I think let's leave it there. Thank you again, Trevor, and congratulations.
Well, thank you. Thanks very much, Mark.
Huge congratulations to Trevor. Keep the gags coming. Wait out the construction season and emerge magnificent from the closet. Thank you, everyone, for coming to the n+1 Writers Awards ceremony and for celebrating the work of these outstanding writers along with us and basking in their really wonderful speeches. I'd also like to thank our sponsors who helped make this event possible: Echo Press, Audible, Massey and McQuilkin, Lambda Literary, Grove Atlantic, the Gernert Company, Hachette Book Group, Amazon Studios, Farrar, Straus and Giroux, Penguin Random House, W.W. Norton and Company, the Cheney Agency, Stanford University Department of English, and Michael and Janet Peach, I'm gonna say, with apologies if I mispronounced that. And if you feel inclined to subscribe, as you do, if there is, anything but ice cold, I don't know what, running through your veins, please visit n+1mag.com/subscribe. And if you already subscribe but want to do more to support great new writing, please donate at n+1mag.com/donate. Thanks.
Thank you, Elif. I just really want to thank you so much for taking the time out to be with us, and it really means a lot. We're very, very grateful. And
Such a pleasure.
Thank you, truly. I also want to thank both of our winners tonight, Christina Nichol and Trevor Shikaze. You guys are the greatest. I want to thank our incredible staff, Lisa Borst, Nicole Lippman, Danny Oliver, Rachel Ossip. You guys, none of us is, I wouldn't say that any of us is technically minded, but together a bunch of humanities people can really make Zoom magic. And before everyone else comes up to say goodbye, I just want to thank Anthony one more time. We really miss you so much, and we're so grateful. We're so grateful for everything. And please do buy Anthony's book, After Parties. It's out in August from Echo. You can order it from n+1 or from Echo or from anywhere. Don't order it from Amazon. Thanks so much. And now, could we just see everyone, all our participants again, and wave goodbye? Hi, everyone. Thank you again. Great to see you. We'll keep the chat running for a few minutes just so everybody can kind of, simulate the party sort of recessional experience and take slow walks, go to the coat rack, go take a quick bathroom run if you need it. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, guys. Congratulations. It's such a pleasure to work with you. And great speeches. We'll, with your permission and blessing, we'll share them with the world who didn't get to come tonight.
Absolutely.
Thank you guys. Thank you.
All right, see you all in the chat. Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. It's just been, I know that not everybody is going off in the chat, but we're grateful to all of you who are and who aren't either, and stick around for a little bit.
Thank you.
They tend to wiggle when they walk. The infrastructure rots, and the owners hate the jocks with their agents and their dates. If the signatures are checked, you'll just have to wait. And we're counting up the instants that we saved. Tired nation so depraved. From the cheap seats, see us wave to the camera. It took a giant